Well, after a week's hiatus, we're back at Dueling Columnists. I'm Scott Rich.
And I'm Chris Cusack.
And today we're going to start things off discussing a column I wrote this week discussing classiness in Kville. There was an email sent out to the Kville listserv last week by a headline monitor saying that Coach K had requested that a few chants amongst the Cameron Crazies would be eliminated, including the O chant, including the You Suck chant. And he also said he wanted to eliminate as much profanity as possible amongst the Cameron Crazies in order to create a environment that's more classy. My question to you, Chris, is that something that really needs to be considered?
Well, I think it's become pretty obvious, and I'm about to enrage a large group of people on this campus, but it's become pretty clear that the Cameron Crazies aren't that different from a lot of different student sections around the country.
You're right, people are going to be really mad at you
now. But it's true. I've gone to games at other schools around the country, at Gonzaga, up east. It's all the basic same stuff. And if we can, or the Cameron Crazies can get away from that, and I think they'll become a better section, or a more effective section in what they're trying to do. And they're trying to get in players' heads, help them miss shots, all that stuff. And that only comes with things that players haven't heard before. They've heard all the FUs and the, go to hells. They've heard all that stuff. But they haven't heard some of the more clever stuff, which isn't necessarily profane. So I think it's a good idea. And we'll see whether or not the Cameron Crazies can step up.
I agree with you that, getting rid of profanity in itself isn't a bad idea. Getting rid of the O chant and that type of stuff, that's fine, especially since those are chants that originated in Maryland, and that's a thing that the Cameron Crazies want to differentiate themselves about. My whole problem with the email was the fact that it implied that classiness is a function of vulgarity. In the exact same email, when the email said, they want to eliminate the, bull chant against refs, they also said, but we encourage you to find out, about a player's romantic history, and if, their girlfriend cheated on them or just broke up with them, and then just let them hear it the rest of the game. This just may be my definition of classy, but I feel like something like that, that's actually emotionally harmful to a player, is much less classy than saying F you or go to hell. That's something that you can shrug off. But if a 1,000 people are making fun of you because the Cameron Crazies once chanted Sean May eats babies. They once chanted to Wayne Ellington, who had proposed multiple times to his girlfriend and gotten rejected each time. They started chanting he said no, she said no every single time went to the free throw line. That's pretty. It doesn't say any swear words, but that's pretty mean-spirited. But again, that's what they're encouraging. So to say that they want the Cameron Crazies to be classy seems a little bit hypocritical to me.
But at the end of the day, at least for what I think they're trying to do, it's all about what appears on TV. And the only words that are discernible on TV a lot of times are the words that aren't allowed to be on TV. So I think that's, at the end of the day, what they're looking for. I really think, from Coach K's perspective, it's not about being classy in terms of what's on the court. He wants kids to get deep into what his opponents are doing and, chant those things like Sean May eats babies. He wants that, but I think he just doesn't want the bad image that would be shown on TV. And at the end of the day, I think that's okay.
Yeah, no, and again, in my column I tried to make it clear that I don't think, yelling F you or something like that, that's a bad chant. It lacks originality and all that stuff. It's not something that we want to do as the Cameron Crazies. But at the same time, some of these other things we do are just as not classy as saying F you. So the thing that sort of irked me was the fact that, if we want to be classy, then all the Cameron Crazies can say is let's go Duke and here we go Devils, here we go.
Well, and I disagree with that. I think there are plenty of things that you can say that aren't classy. And I mean, look, Sean May eats babies is not a classy thing to say. I have no debate with that. But there are plenty of things you can attack players with that aren't that can still get in their heads.
Like what? What's an example of that?
Oh boy, I mean, look at the crazy towel guy. The crazy towel guy just getting up and getting everyone loud. Being loud gets in people's heads, and obviously saying things like, the Cameron Crazies have said in the past that are offensive, she said no, all that stuff. It gets in players' heads, but every school's doing that. Every school knows everything about players.
Weren't you just saying that the Cameron Crazies want to be different than other student sections?
Yeah, exactly. And every student section says stuff like Sean May eats babies, but they all often add the FU and all that. And look, I'm not saying I'm necessarily that much against, those things, but my point is to be different. Everyone knows everything about all these players because of the internet. That's not something that, it's not something Cameron holds an advantage over. We don't do more research than anybody else, or the Cameron Crazies don't. I think it's all about finding new ways to get in players' heads, and at this point, it's become stagnant.
Okay, let's move on from this argument to something else, and let's move to the sport of fall, which is Duke football. a lot of people might just think, oh, Duke football season's over. They actually have a few more games to play, despite the fact that the Duke football team is 1-6. So obviously this has been an extremely, extremely disappointing year for the Duke football team. Coming into the season, many people thought this was the year Duke would actually challenge for a bowl berth. Instead, Duke is 1-6. They've lost a few games that they really were expected to win, talking about, you know, a game against Army. A game against Navy this weekend was a game that in the preseason people might have, you know, expected Duke to win. Now, not so sure. How big of a blow to the Duke football program has this season been?
Well, it's obviously a step back. I mean, I think people were getting a little bit too excited after last season when they almost made a bowl game. They had a lot of great wins. It was a big step forward for the program. But you got to realize, when you lose a senior quarterback who was I'm trying to remember, second in the ACC in all-time passing yards.
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, just an incredible quarterback, and you losing that guy who's the leader of the offense, and you throw in a guy who really has no experience, you're going to take a step back. And honestly, most of the other facets of the game have actually improved. It's just been the turnovers that Renfrey's had that's really cost Duke a lot of games.
I see where you're coming from, but I actually think that, as unfair as it may be, the way that this season has sort of influenced fans' opinion of the Blue Devils is going to be a very, very negative factor. Coming into the season for the first time in a long, long time, there was optimism about Duke football. People were excited that Coach Cutcliffe came back after being, you know, after flirting with Tennessee. They were excited about Sean Renfrey. They were excited about the possibilities on the offense. And they were excited about the possibility of being competitive. Now that Duke's gone the exact opposite way from that, I mean, you can tell the fan base is depressed. And I feel like that is going to influence, you know, there's not going to be the same energy first game next year as there was this year.
Well,
I think that's going to hurt the program.
But at the end of the day, in a stadium that barely seats 35,000, the energy in lawless weight doesn't really matter.
Well,
the students didn't even fill the student section, or barely fill the student section for Alabama this year.
I disagree with that, though. I disagree with that. When you come to a Division I school, even if it's Duke, if you look up into the stands and you see a half-full stadium, that's got to be depressing. When you part of college football that makes college football different from essentially any other sport is, you know, the energy, how much do students care about their team. And when you come to Duke and you see a half-full student section, or not even half-full at some games, that's got to be depressing. You got to think, okay, you know, from a football player's perspective, what am I playing for now? It's a catch-22.
But yeah, because there's no school in the country with students that would support a consistently terrible team.
No,
and that's what you're asking the students to do this time. I mean, I think it's fair for the students to say, look, you've never really won. You don't really have any tradition. Win first, then we'll follow. That's what happened with basketball. That's what's happened with every other sport on this campus, and really across the nation. There's no school with students that supports a terrible team every year.
No, I agree, but it is in the sense of catch-22. Yes, if the football team started to win, the student support would come, and we did see that over the last couple of years. But at the same time, I think, and people may argue with this with me, I think the wins aren't going to come until there's student support. I really feel that that's an important part of college football, an important intangible that people really undervalue.
But it's an important intangible, but you can't achieve any kind of noise in that stadium. It's barely a horseshoe. There's no fan support, I think. And even if they did fill the stadium, they got loud. I mean, you heard even when Alabama came and there were 40,000 people in the stands, it still wasn't very loud.
Well, it's beyond the sound, though. I mean, a couple weeks ago, Sidney Sarmiento had a quote about how much it angered him that his professors were just writing off the team and saying, oh, you guys are going to lose, oh, you guys are awful. I mean, that's essentially the opinion around campus, and that's the environment around campus, that people just expect this team to lose and don't care whether they do or not. And I feel like that's just such a debilitating feeling for a football player who, you know, they play, you know, they put 40 hours a week into this team, into working for it, and they get no sort of, you know, compensation emotionally from their campus to people who they're supposedly trying to support. I feel like that really is hurting the football team more than people care to say.
Let's hope they're not putting in 40 hours a week.
That's true. That would be Michigan's situation right there.
I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to whether or not they can win. And I think, with the exception of Mr. Sean Renfrey, they've made strides towards becoming better. But it's been overshadowed by the fact that he's had a pretty rough season so far. And that's a nice way of putting it. So,
yeah.
See what happens.
All right, well, 2 interesting discussions today on Dueling Columnists. We will see you next week.